Good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are in the world. I would like to welcome our next speaker, who is Dr. Deborah Healey. In her presentation called The Power of Digital Storytelling. Dr. Deborah Healey was the 2019-2020 president of TESOL International Association. She has taught online and face-to-face teacher training courses, primarily focusing on technology and education. She has also taught both ESL and EFL at community colleges and language institutes, including the Yemen America Language Institute in Sana'a. She has written and presented extensively internationally in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, the US, and Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, the West Bank, Turkey, and Tunisia, mashallah. Her recent areas of research include digital storytelling, gamification, massive open online courses or MOOCs, and online teaching approaches. Her doctorate is in computers in education, and there is her website. Dr. Deborah Healey, we are so honored and pleased to have you here today. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. So, heaven forbid you should escape a screen share for even a moment. Let me say that I share Harry's delight at being a past president. It is a wonderful thing. What I'd like you all to do is to please post in the chat where you're from and the level and type of learner that you teach. You can see here let me get this out of the way. Okay, you can see here the link to this site, and I'll show it again at the end. It's got a lot of other resources on it. So hopefully you will post in the chat where you're from and all the kinds of people you teach. I'm from Portland, Oregon in the United States, which rests on the traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Malala, and many other tribes and bands. So, okay, Oman, Vermont, Algerian based in Kuwait, UAE. Yeah, it's great to see where you all are from, and that this is indeed an international group, clearly, as Harry was saying. So let's get started here. Our story for today is in 4 chapters and an epilogue. First chapter, why do we tell stories? Then second chapter, give you some simple digital stories, creating multimedia stories in chapter 3. We'll put it together in chapter 4, and then there will be a brief epilogue at the end. Our overall question here is why and how should we use digital storytelling in our classrooms? So let's look at chapter 1. Why we tell stories. I'm sure that many of you tell stories in class or have your students tell stories. Let's think about the power of story in our lives with a few images. So people tell stories to explain the world. This is Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. Traditionally, it was how we explain why things are the way they are. And we still use stories to explain why things are the way they are. People also tell stories to understand ourselves, because when we speak and write about ourselves, when we tell our own story, we can help ourselves understand who we are better. When we share our lives in stories, we connect. So why do we as teachers use stories in our classes? Well, it makes learning memorable. It engages learners because people remember stories better than raw facts. It lets us also as teachers share a bit of ourselves with our learners through our stories, also creating community. And learners tell stories, of course, to practice language, to create, to allow their creativity to come through, which gives them a sense of autonomy and agency, and to share their ideas and their lives. Extremely helpful. TESOL's 6 principles for exemplary teaching of English learners. Principle number 1 is know your learners. And a story is a great way to get there. On to chapter 2. As we know this about stories, now let's look at some ways to create some simple digital stories. I'm going to give you 3 examples. These all have some pre-selected elements with photos, some text in one of the cases. You choose graphics, you add your own text to them. So these are 3 examples of sort of easy ways to get started with using digital storytelling. One of these is Picklets. I really like the Picklets site. If you're in a 1 computer classroom, we'll choose a picture. What Picklets gives you is this set of words, nouns, adjectives, adverbs, verbs, and universal words. So that it's sort of like you've created a word wall in your class. You can use the photos without the suggested words, but this really builds vocabulary. And it's a great tool for our learners to use in pairs or small groups, both co-creating a story and to help explain to each other what words mean and what they might want to see. Can you all see the words here? If you can see the words, maybe try making 1 sentence with some of these words. Now, the other thing about the words are when you click on a word, it gives you not only that word that you see on the screen, but also the word forms. So you see plurals, possessives. With the verbs, you see a range of verb tenses. So you've got a whole bunch of choices that will help create a story. So this is your chance. If you can see the words here, if you've come up with a sentence, ooh, the rhythmic waves surround me. It gets really poetic in many cases. Another sentence. Let's get 1 more sentence out here. Awfully early for me this morning. I expect you to participate. So think of any word and add to it. You don't have to create only with these words as well. You can choose to use this to spark further creativity. And then have, so the question is, storytelling has fantasy. How do you motivate students to start? Well, in some ways, using this kind of tool that offers the scaffolding, the supports, is a way of doing it. It's not exactly fantasy. There might be somebody, you can find pictures that may relate to what their lives are. And if it relates to their lives, then it's easier to use this kind of scaffolding and help them build creating their stories. Okay, and Margie's the hypnotic sea allows me to breathe. Finally, well, that's a long sentence. In any event, I mean, what this lets you do is create a feeling. The creativity is part of it, but also if you can choose a picture that relates to their lives, then it automatically gives you this word wall. As a teacher, it saves you time because you don't have to create the word wall. It's a handy thing for you to consider using. The next thing I want to talk about is comics. There are a lot of different comic strip creators. It's a free site, but you need to log in. You need to create a free login to use it. They're up to this is 3 cells, 3 little things, but you can have up to 18. What make-believe comics and many of the comic creators give you are characters to choose from. This gives you backgrounds to choose from, talk balloons and speech balloons that you type into. You can also add certain kinds of words like you see here, pow and eek. There are a variety of things that it gives you. And students can arrange the characters and the props in different ways. And of course, they add their own speech bubbles. This doesn't have words, but it doesn't give you a lot of words like Picklets, but it gives you images and a kind of structure. Many of our learners are quite familiar with comics, maybe manga. And this is a form that then allows them to create a story in a form that may be quite familiar to them. It's also really addictive. I created this quick little one. There's the first scene, what a beautiful day at the beach. Second scene, or out in the countryside. I love to be outside in the country. You notice her eyes change between these two. And the third, you've probably figured out, I have a lot of Zoom backgrounds. So this took a few minutes to create, but it's inspirational. You have ideas that you can be inspired by looking at the different backgrounds and the different characters. There are a lot of very strange characters in here. I think Godzilla, the giant monster, there are a lot of different characters that are part of comics. What a great opportunity for them to show their creativity in a digital way. You can save it, you can share it. I mean, part of the reason that you have a login is so that you can save and share your work. The third one, I love this one personally, but it's maybe because I love creativity and inspiring creativity in our learners. What this does is it presents you with 5 photos. Random photos selected for 5 photos. So you randomly select one photo from these 5 photos. When you have your photos, then you create a story. Now, the thing about using random, I've done random pictures. In the old days, it was with, just physical pictures in class. And the idea about using pictures that are not on the surface related is that it forces learners to think about what connects these things. How can I possibly connect these ideas? It drives creativity because they need to find the connections. This is a lovely tool for a 1-computer classroom. The teachers will show these digital images. Everyone creates a story. Or even better, when students work in pairs or small groups, and advanced learners, of course, can work on their own. This one is only images, photos from Flickr. And so what you get at the end is a completed story. These are 5 different photos, and you create a story from it, and then you can save and share your story so that it goes on to the 5-card Flickr site. So again, you get a way of expressing yourself as a learner and sharing your ideas with a broader group than just within the classroom. But you can, of course, just hold it within the classroom and not share it, which is, something to consider depending on what your learners want to do. If we look at now multimedia stories, in a way, one of the videos that Harry showed, the one about the IATF people, was like a digital story. Because so far we've talked about the power of a story, some simple tools, but multimedia is where it really comes to life and where you get into a lot of 21st century skills. So I'm going to talk about some multimedia elements, an example, something about planning, and then about media. Let me hopefully this will actually play and you can hear it. I hope I set it up right. Let's try it. Let's go back and see if it'll play. Let me know if you can hear it.
Something I can eat for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Although many may differ, but I love eating my Somali injera. I'm rolling around the kitchen, excited to make my first injera. And I thought, I'm my mother's daughter after all. I will cook as good as her. The night before, I mixed the ajin, the mixture used to make the injera. Ajin gagara, as my mom says, meaning beat the mixture. The louder the sound, the better the mixture. I wake up to a beautiful mixture, smelling like it's ready to be cooked. I get my berenjena ready, put coal into the burjiko, and start the fire. As the coal gets lighter red, I put together milk, water, and tea spices to prepare the tea. I put the tea on, hoping it will smell just like my mom's, and our neighbor will come running to get his cup of tea. As I get excited, I get my bowl of water, the furanjero, and sit on the gumber. I get a scoop of the ajin on my furanjero, and I swirl it into the bir. As I do that, I burnt my hand. Ouch, I say, and my mom says, if you burnt yourself, that means it's going well. That is something I still say. Do you even make injera without burning yourself? As an adult, I look at my mom's cooking and hope to someday cook like her. Because as she says, a meal can bring people together without a reason.
Okay, the backstory on this is also really interesting. This is from Story Center, which is a great resource for digital stories. It's where learners can share stories again. You notice it's not a professional video, it's a personal story. And it's about a Somali now woman, but who was a girl when she came to Idaho in the United States, which is not a state that has a lot of people of color. And she's remembering her life before and connecting it to now. And you can see the care that she took in preparing this video. So you can think for a moment about how it makes you feel when you see what she said about her life and herself. Oops, stop, nope, okay. So when you think about it, would your students understand that story? And think also about what language skills students would need to create that kind of story and the technology skills they might need. So if you want, you can share in the chat some of your thoughts about this. See, an inspiring story. So what do you think? Would your students understand it? Would they relate to it? Would it be something that your students might have the language skills to create? I also like that video because it shows her use of her own language with the subtitles, which are really easy to add in YouTube, by the way. You can explain it so that if you're using a language that other people don't understand, you can put it in there, but it's so authentic. Of course, you're going to call it the beer. You're going to call it those things because that's what they are. So I really like the way who she is in a beautifully personal way. Great, it reflected the culture. It isn't that hard to create this kind of video because, it's just one of those things that we can do these days. You notice the language quality. It doesn't have to be perfect to be a video that you can relate to. You don't need advanced language to talk about a personal story, something that's of real interest to you. I think if you have a student who's like a big fan of, say, Pokemon Go or World of Warcraft, they could talk about why they love that without much English language skill because they love it. The technology skills, they don't have to be really good at technology. That may have been done with PowerPoint, because you can use PowerPoint and turn it into a movie. So it's something that is not that difficult. It's also, our students can record on their phones, and quality is phone quality, but it's fine for what we're doing. I'm going to talk a little more later about other kinds of tools. And the 21st century skills here, the critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, communication, and digital literacy, this idea of knowing how to use media in a way that is effective and powerful. And I'll talk a little more about that later too. So you have a lot of things that come out of this kind of activity. If it's longer or multimedia, you really need to use purpose for it. If there's no desire to communicate to it, that students will need to put into it to make it good. But you plan it. With the storyboard, you've got your text concepts, your image concepts, the audio. You make sure that you have all the things that you need. The order, the elements. It's also a great opportunity for groups or teams and the teacher to work together, and for the teacher to differentiate learning, because different people can be doing different things. And you'll see as we look at more of the elements, the different skills that people can use and show that they understand what they're doing and understand the language. The other advantage of the storyboard for the teacher is that it can help you see who did what and who's doing what as part of the group project. So a kind of assessment tool. But it's really useful to use this approach to help talk about, again, digital literacy and the power of image and music to influence without people really noticing that they're being influenced. Music is especially powerful this way. We often don't notice the music, but it affects us. And that's a very good thing for our learners to be aware of and using. Now, if you do a relatively simple story, outline or write the story, if it's short, record it on the phone. If you have friends helping, then it takes a little more planning, but it's very doable in a couple of class periods. And given the popularity of things like TikTok among teens, your students may already be doing this. And so this is a way of turning it into a language lesson instead of just showing off their dance moves or whatever they're doing on TikTok. So it's something that allows you to harness what they know about, what they use, and maybe what they're doing in the service of language learning. Well, we've had a happy story so far, but there is a potential obstacle. A major part of digital storytelling is using media. But a large digital literacy skill is recognizing and acknowledging ownership. This may be true of teachers too. And while not everyone is equally concerned about this, it's still anything online can be found. And if you turn it into your students' own work, they may not want their work being grabbed and used with someone else's name on it without their permission. So there are approaches that you can take. Teachers often talk about fair use, where that's mostly talking about text in classrooms. Images are not fair use. A very small amount of audio may be fair use, but downloaded video is not fair use. No amount of video is fair use without it being specified as downloadable and usable. Sad for our learners who really want to use their favorite music video in their digital story. If they're going to do it just in class, who's going to know? But the minute they want to put it back online, they're in trouble because they should not be using music videos and other copyrighted media without permission. But the great thing that's available to us is Creative Commons. This is sometimes called copyleft as opposed to copyright, because it gives permission for people to use this. There are several categories. CC0 is open for everyone. Most of the photos, the pictures you see in my presentations, including this one, are from Pixabay, and they're CC0. CC BY means you have to give the name of the author. CC BY NC is one of the most restrictive categories. It's non-commercial, and you have to attribute. If there isn't a CC license on the material, or they haven't said this is open source, if the author doesn't say this is open source, it is not free to use. And remember, online, all is not lost though. It's far better to help learners know where to find freely usable media and material than to hope they pay attention to copyright. So you show them these different places where you can get freely usable images, for example. I'm going to talk about each of these. I really love, as I said, Pixabay. This is a quick screenshot of a search for happy on Pixabay. There are 338 images, probably more today, for happy. You can see their photos, their line art, their different vector images, different kinds of images. And Pixabay is wonderful because it is CC0, which means you don't need to say the name of the author. You just download and use them. There are other sites that you can find pictures, but if they're not marked as CC or open source, they are not free to use.
Dr. Deborah?
Because,
hi, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Just to give you a heads up, you have 15 minutes.
Okay. Oh, already, yes. Okay, so let me go on quickly. There's also places where you can get music and video. Free Music Archive and Liza Brown's website is a great tool for a great source of information for you. This is Wikimedia, 22 subcategories, hundreds of audio examples. Or one of the things I really think you should consider is encouraging learners to create their own. GarageBand, SongMaker on Chrome. Let me offer a note of caution. SongMaker and Music Lab in general is so addictive, you have to put a time limit on how much time people will spend on these sites, because otherwise they will spend hours and hours doing this. As some sources of video, and again, Liza Brown's website. You can find all of these linked on my website, and I'll show the link again at the end. So, we aren't going to discuss this right now because we're moving right along, but think about how you might work on copyright issues. And remember, giving people alternatives is way better than saying, oh, don't. You say, here's what you use, way. And we're now on our last chapter. So we looked at what digital storytelling is, some ways to combine text and graphics, copyright, copyleft, some sources of free images, and now let's make a multimedia story. There are 5 basic phases of doing this, and I'm going to look at each of these very briefly in turn. You think about your elements, the learning objective, the purpose, point of view, the media, focus, and practice. So there are things what you think about with the content. They're going to write the story, the storyboard is useful, and they're thinking about their narration as part of it. Tell them how to make an impact. This is, again, digital literacy. They have to plan ahead for their audio and video. You can play music while you're recording the narration. That's one way of doing it. But this can take forever, and the teacher needs to set time limits, or they will spend all of their time finding great media and not create their video. Our learners do not like to hear this, but they need to practice and practice some more. There are The more complex their story is, the more they need to practice. Practice will let them focus. It'll give them a sense of pacing. It'll improve their language. But they don't want to hear this, so you have to be firm. You have to maybe get a first version, second version, third version. Recording is actually easier than you think. There are a lot of how-to videos, how to do it in PowerPoint, how to do it in Google Slides, how to use iMovie, how to use Movie Maker. So there's a lot of how-to videos on creating the actual recording. And PowerPoint is really easy. With Google Slides, you screencast and you use Google Slides, and they allow you to edit, which is great because you want to be able to edit it. And then finally, you're going to save it as MP4 or export as MP4, which is the best format to save in. And then you can post it in a range of places. The thing about YouTube is that it's really easy to add video to YouTube. The problem with YouTube is user privacy. A class channel, or if it's unlisted when you put it on YouTube, are good choices. And if your students are not adults, you really have to do it that way. You need to make sure that adults know the risks. You can also use free blogs like Blogger, Google Sites, or WordPress. These are all free tools that you can use to share the music videos. To use for a digital story that anyone can see is a powerful motivator. It encourages our learners to use 21st century skills in creating digitally, including finding freely usable media, embedding it, and turning it into a shareable product. This is an amazing opportunity. So I'd like you to think about this. Is this something you'd like to try? And the kinds of stories your learners might create. So to the epilogue, we're at the end of our story. It started with a question: why and how should we use digital storytelling in our classrooms? We saw some motivations, the why, had a few skill building adventures with simple stories, some of the how. We got drawn in by the personal story from our Somali refugee, then built a few skills with the storyboard. We faced an obstacle in access to freely usable media and the need for students to be aware of risks. But in resolving that, we built more skills that will allow us to help our students create great digital stories. Back to the how. If you are a storyteller, you might recognize this as similar to the hero's journey narrative arc. But anyway, you've learned a few things, I hope, with this. And let's answer the why part of our original question now. Why we should use digital storytelling in our classrooms. Well, learners will use the digital stories they create to explain their world. They will reach us and others with their stories, and it will help them understand themselves as digital citizens. So I'd like to thank you for being here. This is my email address, my website. You can take a shot of the QR code for that website, or you can find a link to this on deborahhealey.com. An easy to remember site. I hope you will try digital storytelling, and feel free to email me if you do try it or if you have questions, because students can feel creative and empowered by sharing their story and show their digital literacy. And I think they and you will enjoy the outcomes. So I'm going to stop talking now and leave this up for a little bit so that you can do that, and so you can take note of that. And if there are any questions, I have a few minutes left for questions.
Dr. Deborah, thank you very much. This was very interesting and engaging. We've got two questions. The first says, what are some ways to add digital storytelling to a writing class for adults?
Okay, with adults, it's actually pretty easy. You can use any of the topics that you might be using with your adult learners, and you turn them into, how can you create a story with this? For example, say they're, if you've got English for specific purposes learners, maybe they're in a business setting. Well, maybe it's a story about your desire to become a successful entrepreneur. Maybe it's a story about how the factory produces great products. So they can turn what they're doing into a story. And then it becomes really useful to them, because they're talking not only about themselves, but about something that is important to them and something that they are learning about. So it could help them in a range of ways to improve their language, as well as pushing them a little bit to get a little deeper into what they're learning about, the content of what they're learning about. So I think it would be a really great thing to do in ESP, but in any class, you can write a story about it to just about any topic that people are working on.
Did you find any obstacles grading these projects or these digital projects? Because mostly instructors face problems when it comes to digital or to media.
Right. A big part of it is like any kind of writing, you start with writing or oral presentations, you start with a rubric, and you give learners the rubric from the very beginning. And in the case of a digital storytelling, the rubric will include things like where they got the media and having acknowledgments, because you can have a slide at the end that acknowledges where everything came from. And so that could be part of your rubric. The other way to do it too is you have peer review as part of it. You have learners looking at it in the process, and then at the end, where people say, what did they think? What do they feel about it? Where their peer review isn't necessarily the grading, but it helps you as the teacher see how understandable it was to others, how motivating it was to others, and that can be part of your rubric. But having the rubric from the beginning is very, very important. And like I said, if you're using a storyboard, you can have names assigned to different parts of the work so that it will help you as the teacher to understand who did what as part of this work. And that can be very, very useful.
Wonderful. Thank you. One more question. How would you include storytelling in a more active way in teaching textbooks for university students, particularly digital storytelling?
Yeah, the textbook, again, is going to be based on content of some sort. If you mean university students who are in regular content-based classes as well as English classes, they would create the digital story perhaps looking at who they will be upon completion of their work and what elements of what they're learning now will contribute to their improvement. If it's an EFL text, then you use a topic that's a part of a unit, and you say, let's create a story about this. And this might be a case where you do the cell phone recording, a shorter version of the recording rather than an extensive one. But you can also tie it to their lives. Why does this affect you? I mean, even at a more beginning proficiency level, how is your family? What does your family look like? That can be a great little digital story. And if they're adding a little music, to their family story, then that's very nice. But if they are taking content courses at the university, then you tie what they're learning from the content, why they're learning it, what they hope to be at the end of learning this, into creating the digital story about it. Because they'll need to use information from their content in order to explain what they're learning and why. And maybe a little quick video to tell other students why they should or should not take a specific class. Why they shouldn't would be even more fun than why they should.
That could create quite a stir.
Maybe you don't publish that quite so publicly. So they have there why you should take the class that's public, and then for within your classroom, why they shouldn't take the class. But they would really enjoy doing that. I think when you add creativity and agency to learning, it really helps learners do a better job because they want to share their ideas.
Yeah, it is something that we struggle with a bit here in the Middle East. It's not necessarily encouraged that much in the grade schools, and when they get into college, I find that they are really afraid to kind of branch out into that creativity, and we have to kind of give them lots and lots of encouragement. Okay, one more question for you. What should we do if one of our students uses a music video as part of a digital story?
Yeah, this is where I think you have to talk about it, and where you say, if you create something, do you want someone to use it without, your permission? Do you want somebody to basically take something that is yours and just use it without permission? If it's part of your rubric that they're not doing that, then they don't do that. If it's, you have to be sort of careful with this though, because you want them to be inspired by their favorite song. And maybe if they're doing something like a lip sync with it, so that they're personally performing it in a way, then you're getting around some of those music video restrictions because they're changing it into their own performance. But it's still pretty sticky. They're better off finding something that they can actually use legitimately rather than using that. They can also link. They don't have to, as long as they don't download it, they can link to it, and the linking is fine. So that's another approach to take, to have them link to it as part of their story. And then when you get to that point, they play the linked video rather than downloading and storing the music video in their own recording.
Wonderful, wonderful idea. Thank you. It's something that, students continually struggle with as they learn to understand what they can and cannot take off of the internet. It seems like it's there for the free taking, but
yeah, which is why I think having, in one of my classes, I actually had an internet creator, someone who posted music online. And he made a very forceful argument for why you should not steal other people's work. And that was the best. These days, so many of our learners are content creators. I think that's something to keep in mind. Not if they're very young, but once they're teens, they're probably creating internet content to the extent that they're allowed to do so.
Wonderful. I believe we are out of our time, and I don't see any other questions. So thank you so much, Dr. Deborah. This has been an